The alternative basic wrap is basically the basic wrap with the front being slightly different. What the alternative basic wrap does is it allows us to make a change in the bang area. If you remember with the straight back wrap or basic wrap, all the rods were wrapped straight down the center panel, reversing away from the face. And in this technique, the alternative basic wrap, we leave everything in front of the apex. The apex is approximately here. So we're a couple of rods in front of the apex we've made apart. And in this section, we have some alternatives. We can roll this all forward for clients who wear a bang. And if clients happen to have a side part, we could also roll this to the right or to the left. And that would help us to give them a side part. So for the alternative basic wrap, I'm just going to be rolling these forward. Before I start that though, I just want to talk about when you wrap the remainder of this head. So remember, start just in front of the apex, and if you've practiced your perm wrapping, you will be able to do this quite quickly. You'll notice we alternated gray and pink rods for this one, and that's just because sometimes clients want that. They want a little bit of strength, and the pink rod will give them the strength, but they don't want it to be as tight as a pink rod. So the loose rod will give them a little bit more mobility, and the pink rod gives them strength. So by alternating, we've got strength, mobility, and it just gives a little bit different look. One thing to remember though is that you always have to use a neighboring rod. You cannot jump 2 or 3 rod sizes. So we couldn't use a gray and blue rod because those rods are not neighbors. Remember, our rod sizes go gray, pink, blue, yellow, and then there's a red rod. And I'll be doing a little post on Instagram about the different rod sizes. So when we wrap, we just wrap straight down the center panel. Then when we wrap the back panel next, remember you have to pivot. The first rod can go straight, and then the second and third rod need to have a bit of a pivot to make that turn so that these rods match up and butt up against each other. We don't want to have this panel and this panel not touching, or we don't want to have extra hair in the space here. So we have to make that turn by doing some pivoting, narrow at the back, wide at the front, narrow at the back, wide at the front, and then we can just keep going straight again. When we get to the front side panel, remember sometimes we have to pivot here as well. And where we do our pivoting here is in the receiving area. So it's usually the second or third rod or third or fourth rod that need a little bit of a pivot depending where the client's receiving area is. And in this case, it's going to be narrow at the front and wider at the back. But remember, when you make your narrow to wide, never go wider than the diameter of the rod that you're using. The other thing I just wanted to mention is you'll notice I have gray. I started with gray, and here I started with pink. That just keeps the alternative wave pattern going. You could start with 2 gray and 2 pink and 2 gray, 2 pink. It doesn't really matter, but I usually like to, if I use a gray rod here, I'd like to use a pink rod here. The other thing I just want to mention is when you go to do the other side, also start with the same color rod. So if I started with gray on this side, I'm going to be starting with gray here. If I started with pink here, I'm going to be starting with pink here. For balance purposes, you should have, if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's hope I have 7 on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yes. So if you have the equal same amount of rods, you know your panel in the center is centered. If something happens where you're practicing this wrap and you do your center panel and you need to put a short rod here but not a short rod over here, Or if you have 7 rods on one side but 9 or 8 rods on the other, then maybe your panel wasn't directly in the center of the head. Okay, so those are a few things to think about, sorry. Also, just so you know, we do have perm picks that we can use. Now, perm picks should not be used to solve tension problems. Practice is used to solve tension problems. So if your rods are not sitting correctly, don't think, oh, I'm just gonna put picks in there and that'll make them hold properly. That is not the right thing to do. It's not good for the hair. The curl result, the perm, the client won't be happy with it. It will be uneven curl patterns. So we want to make sure that we are able to wrap with good even tension. But every once in a while you'll get something like this happening where I have just a little tiny bit of hair and you can see it doesn't take up a lot of the rod. And then you might want to use a perm pick. So you just take, I like to use the knob at the bottom because that way the knob kind of keeps it in place. But you can also use the knob at the top and just place that in your elastics, and that will hold that rod in place because it doesn't have enough hair in order to hold the rod in place, so it needs a little extra help. And now you can see it stays in position. The other thing is sometimes we want to put the perm picks all over the head because we just have a client who maybe is a little bit sensitive to having an elastic band mark. So to prevent that, we can put the perm picks in. One thing I'd like to say though is try not to put it in more than 3, maybe 4 rods depending on the shape of the client's head. But if you use a perm pick and you put it in more rods than you should, it puts added stress on the hair. So try to get in the habit of just 1 perm pick for every 3 rods. You can also use this is just a coffee stir stick, and this can also be used, and you would just again position that down the center. Some people like to use, and again only in 3 to 4 rods, some people like to use 1 on each side, so they'll put 2 perm picks down the hair and they'll do every single rod just to make sure that they don't get an elastic band mark, because once you get the elastic band mark, that's a line of demarcation, and what a line of demarcation is in perming is it makes a weak spot on the hair, and that possibly that little indent or weak spot could possibly result in breakage as the client shampoos and uses hot tools or brushes or combs their hair. So I'm just going to wrap the front now. So remember, we can wrap this forward, so just again horizontal forward, or we can wrap it to the side, right or left, or we could also wrap it diagonally a little bit. So that gives more of a design wrap. The start